Hey friends, it's Rachel. Welcome back to Growing Up Green. Last week we learned about composting, what it's made of, and why it's so important. Today we'll learn about how you can get started at home, and I'll show you a couple different systems of making compost in your backyard. Let's start off in the kitchen. So I have gone into my kitchen and found some things that I think are ready to go in my compost pile. I keep my kitchen scraps in just a little Tupperware on the counter. You can get cool compost containers online, but you don't really need anything fancy to get started. You can just use a Tupperware. I don't put the lid on top while it's in my kitchen, and you might think it would get smelly, but actually when you put the lid on and stop any air from getting in, that's what makes your compost smelly. So having it open on the counter doesn't smell bad as long as you take it out pretty regularly. I take mine out every 2 or 3 days. So I have found a few things to put in. I've got some strawberries that have gone bad, so I'll put those in my compost pile. I made coffee this morning, so I saved the coffee grounds, and those can go in the compost too. Remember, we talked last week about how compost needs green organic material and brown organic material. Coffee is a good example of a brown organic material. It doesn't have to be the color brown or the color green. It's more about what kind of nutrients it'll add to the compost. So I'll put the coffee in, and we've got some good brown stuff. I've also got some turnips that I grew in my garden. Normally, I would eat the leaves, but they've been in the fridge a little bit too long, and they don't look very tasty anymore. So I'm gonna cut them off with a pair of scissors. Remember to ask a grown-up before you use scissors. And I can put the leaves in the compost like this, or I can chop them into smaller pieces. Now, worms and ants and tiny little microbes don't have very big mouths. So if you chop it into smaller pieces, it'll be easier for them to eat and break down into soil. So you can just clip it into smaller pieces. Now I still have my turnip root to cook with. Lastly, something that you might not eat, but you might have at home, are flowers. Maybe you cut some from a garden or got them as a gift. Maybe someone in your household got them for Mother's Day. Well, they are so fun and so beautiful in your house, but when they die, you can put them in the compost pile to make new soil. All right, I'm all ready to add this to my pile outside. Let me show you. So here, friends, is one way of making compost. Basically, you just make a pile and stir it around and give it some time. So I decided I wanted to make my compost area out of things that I already had. So I used the fence, the wall of my house, and then I built another wall to create a box to put my compost in. So every couple of days I add to the pile, and I like to use my pitchfork to stir it around. You could use a shovel or whatever you've got. Stirring it around makes sure that the microbes have all the air they need to survive. Sometimes you'll also need to water your compost pile, just so that it feels a little bit damp. That way, the microbes and the ants have enough water. Let me show you another way of making compost at home. Another way you can make compost, especially if you don't have the space to make a big pile, is by digging a hole in your garden bed near any plants that you think might want a little extra healthy soil. So I dug a hole. You need to dig it at least a foot deep. That way no animals can smell your compost from above the soil. But this is a great way to do it. So now you can add your compost into the hole and cover it back up with soil. The worms and the microbes will find it and break it down right where it is. It's pretty easy, and it usually happens within a couple of months. The trick about this method is that you can't put all your compost in the same spot. You have to keep digging new holes so that it has time to break down. Here is one more system you could use to make compost at home. This is called the tumbler method. This tumbler belongs to my neighbor, Lena. What you do is you slide the door open, and inside you put all your compost. You can see it's turning to dirt pretty quickly. While you're adding scraps to one side, you can leave the other side alone, giving it time to break down all the way without putting new stuff in there. So this is a really good system. And instead of having to stir your pile around, you can just roll this whole tumbler around and around so that it periodically gets more air. Thanks for joining me on another Growing Up Green. I hope you're excited about trying to compost at your home. Let me know if you try it and what method you go with. Thanks so much for joining me. We'll see you next week.